Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Tower of Babble podcast. As always, I'm Julian Mush. I'm joined by Jeremy Cozier,
Hello.
and we're going to be reviewing Uncharted, the 2022 film, the movie adaptation of the very good selling, well-selling, best-selling, I don't know, video game franchise Uncharted that's started on the PlayStation 3. Our most recent version was on the PS4, the actual where the franchise stands as a video game now is actually kind of up in the air. But we'll talk a little bit about that. But we're primarily here to talk about the movie. Before we get into everything, I'll just remind everyone to follow us on Twitter at TowerBabblecast, Facebook.com/TowerBabblecast, and head over to our website, towerbabble.ca, to find everything that we do. Including our spin-off show, Small Screen Star Wars. We just wrapped up another season of Star Wars on TV with, of course, the Book of Boba Fett. A mixed bag, I would say. All things considered, but a lot of fun to review nonetheless. And you can find all of our breakdowns there as well as in our the podcast feed. You can also help support the show by heading over to patreon.com/TowerBabblecast, where for as little as $5 a month, you can get access to some bonus content. We do a monthly film club over here at ToB. This month is going to be Gone Girl. David Fincher's Gone Girl is going to be the film we're reviewing this month, so look forward to that. Okay, let's get into this. I feel like there's a lot to cover. And the reason that I think there's a lot to cover is, despite that we're going to be talking about this as a movie, I don't think it can be divorced from the conversation about how it has been adapted from the actual game. So let's start by talking about our history with the franchise. I talked about, I teased when I was putting it on Twitter that we'd be going live here in a couple minutes. And we do this live, by the way, on Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. And you can join the show and chat with us live during the show by going to any of those places. The best place to keep an eye on when we're going live is obviously to subscribe to us on those channels, but also on Twitter, where I typically will announce ahead of time that we're going to be going live. But I was saying on there that we have a long history, Jeremy, between us with this franchise, and it goes back a long way. I think of course, the famous story about when you showed me Uncharted 2 for the first time. When I was just living.
So I must have brought over the PS3 or something.
That's right.
Like that.
That's right. To my parents' basement. And you plugged in.
I was like, you got to get a load of this.
You were like, Jeremy, it's so funny because you were like, you have to see this game. I was like, okay, yeah. I'm excited. I'm like, let's do it. And then you turned on Uncharted 2, and it starts with that train sequence, with a train like crash, and I was just blown away. Changed my life. Uncharted 2 is my favorite game of all time. It just has this very special place in my heart. It's, I think, basically a perfect video game. Great story. The characters are great. I'm sitting here right now with Nathan Drake himself, a statuette that I have from Uncharted 3.
For
Drake's Deception.
$300.
I bought this for $300.
No, I don't know.
I don't think so. I think it was like $100 to get the special edition.
Not one of the better looking special edition statuettes.
His face has a little leaves a little something to be desired. I'll just say
a little plasticky clay, just not quite defined.
Well, it doesn't really feel like Nathan Drake to me. It just kind of feels like generic man with gun. It's
got the hairline down. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and he's got the shirt and the ring is visible. But
what's with the haircuts in this movie? Like the two main characters have the same haircut.
Jeremy, it doesn't make any sense.
It's the exact same haircut for, you know what I mean, like for their
hair. Well, it's not only that. Like their hair, I feel like changes in the throughout. Like in the same scene, you'll get like different haircuts. Pickups probably from later.
And then you just get a shot of a jacked Victor Sullivan.
Jeremy, everyone's jacked in this movie. This is the new. This is the way it works in the Marvel universe. If you're a male action star, you have to have a scene. And really, it actually goes back further than that. It goes back to the 80s. Think of like Top Gun, right? In that volleyball scene, there's got to be the equivalent of a volleyball scene in basically every modern action movie now. So, I'm not complaining, but I will say that I'm struggling still a little bit with how much I liked having Mark Wahlberg as Sully. I'm still on the fence of it. I think overall I liked it. I think it's fine, but it and this is kind of what we're talking about, where it's like, how do they adapt the game, and we'll get to that in a sec. But Jeremy, let's finish our thought here with the game franchise. Did you start with Uncharted 1, or did Uncharted 2 pull you in the same way it did me?
I think it was 2. It was 2 as well. I'm pretty sure.
Right.
And then I had to go back to find a copy of Uncharted 1. But it was like, and what was interesting was it was immediately noticeable, the difference in quality between the two products, even with the time lapse. I don't know how many years the turnaround.
It was only like 2.5
2 or
years or
3.
something like that. Yeah.
But it was like the second one, just the details they're everywhere. So it's so good.
Uncharted 2, everyone talks about like the jump from Assassin's Creed 1 to 2 as being like this big deal, right? And I agree that is a big deal. I think the jump from Uncharted 1 to Uncharted 2 is equally as big. By the way, this is a 2-year turnaround. Uncharted came out in 2007. 2009 is Uncharted 2. 2011 is Uncharted 3. And Golden Abyss. We don't talk about Golden Abyss, but
there's definitely a fan base for that.
There is,
people love the Vita.
We'll just say that Naughty Dog doesn't talk about that game.
That particular game, I think, is almost 10 years old, which is a crazy milestone.
It's
I feel like
over 10 years old. It came out in 2011.
Right.
So, I mean, I'll just say that ever since playing that game, so to finish that story, when I played Uncharted 2 that day, I decided I had to buy a PlayStation 3 immediately. So we
okay.
Like I couldn't wait.
I thought we were speeding through the story, but you want to take your time and just kind of.
I wanted to. It's just I have to say it. Like we're get to the movie. This is like, I know I've told this story before for those who maybe have been listening for a long time, but we got in a car and we drove around Winnipeg in the middle of the night looking for a 24/7 Walmart that did not exist. We thought it did.
But it was at a time period where people would often question around that time period for some reason, like, is there a 24-hour Walmart? And a lot of people said that there was.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we just didn't like Google it and find out for sure.
Yeah. For whatever, at that time, you don't just Google instantly everything. I don't know. So anyway, the point is, we didn't find one. I went and bought one the next day at Best Buy.
But what it shows is the desire to attain this thing.
Jeremy, I had to play it.
You had to go on a little adventure of your own, so to speak.
Right.
From
my own Drake's Fortune, if you will.
Right.
You know. My own Drake's Deception, perhaps, with the lack of the 24-hour.
And I feel also to mention, to go back a little bit further, I didn't buy a PS3 yet. I believe. I think it was, I had my brother's for some reason.
Oh, maybe that's what it was. That's why we felt like we needed a PlayStation, right?
Right. Yeah, because I dove back into the gaming world after being away from it, essentially during like the beginning of the Wii, right, and like just before that, and then the PS3, having that just kind of blew my mind pretty much.
Yeah, it's so crazy because I have basically no recollection of Uncharted being even sold to me, like being marketed at me. The first game, like I didn't know it existed, you know. And then one day, like I just feel like this it could never happen to me now, being so close to the gaming industry, and it just looks so much different. But like, imagine just like discovering a game as good as Uncharted 2 and you didn't even know it existed. What an amazing experience that is. So it was really, like I said, it was really a game changer for me. And
what it came down to, I think, is the talent involved. We talked about the studio, though. Naughty Dog, essentially the greatest studio working today.
Yeah, I would agree. I think certainly from a storytelling perspective, I don't think there's anyone even close to doing what they're doing.
and with the scope they attach to it,
Yeah.
and just and the team's obviously grown, and obviously some of the creative talent making the Last of Us series, which
Right.
is another level of immersion.
Well, because I think you can look at The Last of Us and see a direct parallel between where Uncharted got them. Like
Mhm.
they were making Uncharted 3 and The Last of Us, I think, at the same time in parallel, and they're like, they're 3D third person action adventure games for all, when they're boiled right down to it. Right, both of them are that. One is much more lighter, much more Indiana Jones inspired, and I have Indiana Jones playing behind me, as I think it felt appropriate as this being a derivative of a derivative in some sense, because you had Tomb Raider, which kind of uh, blazed a trail, for this type of game, this action adventure type game. But at the time, the type of Tomb Raider games were brutal. Like there was bad games, The remake hadn't happened yet. It was an answer to Uncharted. So, which even crazier is now you think about how this movie has come out, right? And Jeremy, have you ever seen the Alicia Vikander Tomb Raider film?
I have.
And it's a direct retelling of the first game of that remake, Tomb Raider remake. It's a fine movie. It's fine.
It's similar.
Um,
I would say, yeah, I'd agree it's similar to this.
Same.
It's
It certainly comes from, like I said, it comes from that same. It has the same genes, right? It all comes from Tomb Raider. Sorry, from what am I thinking of? Sorry, um, but it all comes back to that Indiana Jones stuff, right? And so you have this great talented team, and this great writing, like Amy Hennig. I think we
yes,
remember, like,
you have to
how
mention. Yeah.
I don't know how she gets. By the way, she gets a thank you in the movie,
Mhm.
at the end, a special thanks at the very end of the credits with like a bunch of like associations and stuff. But hers is the only like name that like jumps out at me, and it's crazy that we knew who Amy Hennig was, because I don't know
Yeah.
how many like head writers we knew. I don't know if she was like the creative director necessarily, but she was for sure the writer. And I, it's just really insane to me. Like she left Naughty Dog shortly after what on Last of Us Part One, I think,
Maybe before
and
that, I don't know.
it's hard to remember.
Can't.
But then she's bounced around the industry ever since. Like how is no one like how is she not had made a bigger stamp on the industry is beyond me. But Uncharted
Yeah.
as a series owes a lot to her. Um, PlayStation, I think, would be in a much different place if it wasn't for Uncharted. I don't know what the sales figures are for the series, but I think it was obviously a big success,
Yeah.
right? It paved the way for mainstream for us to get we knew a writer. We also started learning who these voice actors were for
Nolan
these
North.
video game characters, right? Nolan North is a great example.
Yeah.
I mean, Emily Rose, who's Elena Fisher, who she doesn't appear in this game in this movie. We had Richard McGonigal as Victor Sullivan, Claudia Blake as Chloe Fraser, who does appear in this movie, which is a bit
Right.
fun. But
And those are just epic performances, and with the studio, they use the tactic of utilizing these voice
mocap,
actors as mocap, and working off one another in the same space, and
yeah,
having serious, intense dialogue that has emotion and weight. It paid off wonderfully, and their animators were able to capture all that.
uh-huh.
And the power of the PS3 was still, it was reasonable to make these characters not look as gimmicky as they do from like maybe a screen capture of the game, or a
Right.
GIF or whatever.
Yeah, and they use this kind of stylized realism, this kind of like everything's a little bit brighter, a little bit more glossy in the way that they built the world. I think it totally works for the game that they're telling and the story that they're telling. Jeremy, how many hours do you think you spent watching behind the scenes videos of the Uncharted series? Like, it's got to be for me. It's got to be like hours and hours and hours. Like,
Yeah,
it's
it's a
so as
lot
much as
because
possible.
it's the era of the PS3 brought forth like the YouTube app and the PlayStation Store, where they just documented and created little videos and all this
Yeah.
stuff that we could just kind of like dive into and really see the process of what they do. And when you mention like all the creative talent like behind the game, the voice actors, and then we talk about this movie, it's like that is where it is a disappointment,
Right.
There's nothing really better done in the movie that is a copy of the games.
Yeah.
Everything in the games is better in the
In
games. Like
almost every sense, I think. I don't know how much the movie, because it's been in development for so long, right? And this is what I was coming back to that Tomb Raider thing, because it's like that movie has they did the remakes, they did a trilogy of those games, and they made a movie. And I think, is there not a sequel in development of that if it's not already out? I
I
don't
think
even
so,
know.
yeah. I think
Um,
that's what they announced.
and so it's like that all happened in the process of Sony trying to get their act together. And what's so crazy is to me about this whole thing is that Sony, unlike Nintendo, unlike Microsoft, right, who's also struggled getting their IP out the door into other mediums, but um, doesn't have a film studio, you know, already ready to go. So you have this great relationship between the Sony Pictures brand and the PlayStation brand. They're often doing crossover stuff. You think of the Spider-Man 2 font, or the Spider-Man font that they use for the PlayStation 3, which I don't think is a coincidence, and all this kind of all that kind of stuff has been around for a long time. But it's just so crazy to me that this movie has been in development for so long. How many directors have been attached? The obvious joke that everyone tells is that you know. This movie's been in so long that it was originally having Mark Wahlberg was going to be Nate, but he got too old, so he had to play Sully.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
it's so funny though. Like honestly, like,
it's like
I laugh every time
it's
I
a
hear it.
solid joke. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And like when he tells the story on like one of the late night shows, like he tells the story of how someone told him like, "Oh yeah, like Tom Holland's over here, auditioning for a role or whatever." And Mark is like, "For who?" Like just so confused. Like, what are you talking about?
But I'm Nate. And so I don't know. Like, let's think about that. Let's think about that for a second. We have this version of the movie where we have Tom Holland as Nathan Drake and Mark Wahlberg is Sully. Imagining what we know, knowing what we know about Mark Wahlberg, would that movie have been better? Like, would it have been more closer representation of the games ultimately than what we got?
Hard to tell.
It's really hard to say.
I think it would be fascinating to see Robert De Niro take on Victor Sullivan for
Oh,
sure.
that would have been so good.
That would have been
Yeah,
a cool take. But I think here with Mark, I think we were like, okay, it is what it is. Like we've all kind of grown with this movie and
right.
like kind of jumped on the joke there of him aging out of the role. Uh, and he does a decent job at being funny when him and Tom kind of utilize whatever chemistry that they have as like a sort of an older brother,
Mm-hmm.
younger brother type relationship, which is it's similar to the games, but it's just different because the age gap in the games and where they are in life is different. So it plays differently.
Yeah,
But I think it was funny in maybe the 3 out of the 5 times they kind of played on that joke where Mark was kind of going at Tom a little bit.
right. I think the best one is obviously in that post credit scene. We're not going to spoil it quite yet, but that is good. Um, I will say that like the dynamic is a lot closer to what the dynamic was between Sully and Nate in the flashbacks of Uncharted 3 and 4.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely
You know.
that idea expanded,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I think we're kind of at odds with how the movie shapes up and like I guess like with the
Yeah.
iconic look and just being on the adventure.
Well, for me, there's a couple things, right? It's that like we didn't get a lot of that early Nate stuff in the games. I mean, we got more of it in 4, but less with Sully, and then some of it in 3, and that was like a really amazing moment no one knew about. How
Yeah,
surprising, you know, great sequence. And this movie, I think, is trying to be two things at once. It's trying to live double life. It's trying to be an origin story for Nathan Drake, but it's also trying to be all of his adventures at the same time.
yeah,
It
it's pulling a piece from all the games to make I guess a cohesive plot and how all the relationships are birthed, I
right,
guess.
and it's like, okay, I can buy the dynamic of a young Tom Holland and a young Sully, dynamic, right? I can get that. I can get behind that. I can even get behind bringing in Chloe because, like, when she comes in Uncharted 2, there seems to be a history there. We don't really know what it is. So I like that element of it too. It's like, okay, this is like the Gwen Stacy before MJ, types. If I can bring it back to Spider-Man with Tom Holland, of course, right? And so I'm fine with all of that, but it jumps the shark for me when they start just pulling out all the stops. Well, yeah. I don't know, like, because Jeremy, like, I don't know. For me, that's not as big of a issue because, like, the games themselves had pretty wild premises. I think Uncharted 2, famously, of course, my favorite of the series, but has this finale that's like very cheesy, with like blue sap and like it's essentially
it's a boss
supernatural,
battle. Right?
Well, that third act is all wacky, right? And I love it. I think it's great. But like, so this doesn't seem like a massive reach to me, from that kind of Uncharted 2 stuff. It just feels pulpy, and I'm fine with that. It's just kind of like we're gonna waste the pirate stuff, and we're gonna waste the plane sequence, and we're gonna wait like all of these pieces like that could be part of like cool new adventures and stories that we're gonna tell later on, right? You're just gonna have to like you're just trying to like blow your wad all at once so that you don't waste this opportunity. And it feels like it's like, now where do you go? Because they tease. I guess we can get into spoilers here as we get more into the film itself, but they tease a Nazi plot for the second movie, so maybe they can mishmash some other set pieces from other ones. Maybe there's a ship sinking, and there's they find a hidden city, and like I guess to me it's like either tell a new story if you're going to do the origin story, right, or treat the source material with a little bit more respect, right? Those were good stories, the first one less so, but still kind of a cool idea.
I think their goal was just to establish these characters just rather quickly, like in one movie, and I think it's gonna come off.
It feels rushed.
It just feels a little, I don't know, like just cheap, I guess, or something. Like and like the character like Chloe Fraser is cool in this movie, but way cooler in the games.
Absolutely,
like,
I agree.
Way like the voice actress there, like just definitely puts her mark on that character, and it's just a fascinating back and forth relationship.
For me, it's like, okay, they're all younger versions of the characters, so it's like I can imagine all of them as the older. I can imagine them all as the characters
the older ones would be doing.
Yeah, that is problematic, and like the stakes are just as high, right? There's no. This isn't a lower stakes.
Yeah.
Sorry, say that again.
Like the sequence, honestly, like when they're flying out of the sky and like just like moving from one vessel to the other, like it's just so it just broke it for me completely. Like this is not what these characters would be doing right now, like at all.
Right. It's like you just gotta like in that scenario, it's just like survive, right? And like the way the plane sequence, spoilers for Uncharted 3, the way the plane sequence plays out in the third game is that the plane is crashing, so when he does fall out of the plane, he ends up landing on like a sand dune, basically. It's not over ocean, it's over the desert. So like there's not this like
and then they utilize the train crash at the beginning of the second game or whatever as like and then they use the sequence, the cargo train ship or plane in the third game where he's like he's unconscious for a little bit and they kind of flash back. It's crazy how much they borrow from the games, actually.
Well, and it's there's a lot like pulled whole cloth, right? Like that sequence with the plane is essentially the sequence from the game, like almost one for one. Like I said, they substituted a desert for an ocean, but that's really the only difference. And they start in media res, right? You start the movie and he's upside down, and there's this brief action sequence. And I don't know about you, but I found it super confusing. They're like, we start there, and then it flashes to 15 years ago, right? And then it flashes to present day, and I'm like, Well, wait a minute. Then, like, when the fuck was the like? Were we not at present day when we started the movie?
Yeah, they were moving
Like,
quick. They were definitely moving quick.
right? It's like
Huge
we're just
postcard
keep up.
notes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. By the way, did you like the scenes? Because this movie also does the flashback to young Nate and his brother, right, Sam.
Yeah, they set that up pretty heavy in this movie actually
Yeah.
to be a main sequel component, it
So
seems.
do you think they left that like I don't know if I can't tell if they cast somebody like they must have had like just a person to
They had a
fill the
young
role then.
they had a young version, right? And an older version? Or no, we never saw the older
Well, the
version.
older version was in the prison, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
So, but I don't feel like we saw their face. So I guess maybe they're keeping that as like a, we can cast Sam
I
however
think
we
we did
like.
see a face. I think it was just an actor that maybe we're not familiar
Right.
with.
I'm looking now to see if there's a.
But yeah, that whole component is just heavily taken from Uncharted 4. Um, and yeah, to me, the movie just kind of feels like I was just disappointed as it was playing out, as it was moving so quickly,
Mhm.
and the dynamics of the characters were slightly different, and they just weren't as good as the games and what I remember. Um, but I felt like they did enough to make it feel like a celebration of like what Uncharted is, and
Yeah.
it may be like a lame version of that to people like us who grew up with these games, and like
Right.
those adventures essentially are our adventures when we kind of took them in. Like they feel like they're part of our experience
Well, we feel like
essentially.
we
They're
did that.
memorable.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're just memorable, and this movie is just largely forgettable. Like
But
it
it's
just
made
moves
money,
quick. Yeah.
right? Let's see if I can pull up
And
the
that's the
Uncharted box
positive
office.
spin that happens immediately after the movie is out, is that okay, everyone's watching it and people are liking it.
Well, it's not only that, they're like, well, this is going to be a part of a
Yeah,
franchise.
of
It's
course,
like
yeah, of course they want that.
for me, I feel a little conflicted. It's like, okay, great. The movie was a success. I think overall, I think that's good. Overall, I mostly enjoyed it, so that's good. But you're right. There's this underlying sense of disappointment
Yeah.
in everything.
Because the
It's like,
components
okay,
are just not as good, or even barely exceed or anything. Like it's just not
we
there.
we just
It,
know the better
maybe
version.
Antonio Banderas as being like a fresh villain, I guess,
Oh,
and like
Jeremy, don't
how that
even.
plays out is kind of fascinating within the Uncharted universe. But everybody else is like you're playing the B version
Yeah,
essentially.
right. And it actually comes off even more in the fact that um uh you get that Nolan North like little cameo, and it's like he opens
Yeah, a
his mouth and he
celebration of
has
Uncharted. That's
right.
that's what you would include.
Right, and I feel like I'm okay with that. I'm actually
Yeah, I'm
mostly
fine with
fine
it.
with it. And the theme kind of plays there for a minute.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, but the second you open his mouth, I'm like, that's Nate to me, you know. And then you
Right.
have Tom Holland with his fake his I think someone called it his Marty McFly voice, which
Well,
I
that
think
is
is
essentially who he's trying to emulate, like as a career path as an actor, is like,
right.
that actor of his time.
Hopefully without the Parkinson's.
But well, okay,
Yeah.
but
Sorry, that's a
he
bad
also
joke. I
is
apologize.
British, right? So
Right.
he has to do the English accent or American
Well,
accent,
I
whatever.
do forget that he does a good enough job with the American accent that it's like it's basically seamless to me. All the best Americans in the movies are played by British people. That's just the way it
And
is.
what's cool is like through the interviews and things that I don't know if you've seen them, but like clearly he's a fan of the games, and like when he was younger was playing the games
Yeah.
beat for beat, like, and he's just bringing his younger version of what that would be, and you can't really fault him for it. Like understands, I guess, the assignment that what like the
Right.
director was going for. It's just a little disappointing, but also kind of cool seeing if it is successful, like where these actors take it on a second try. Um,
Well, that's to
and
me. It's
see
like
that
okay, like when does this next movie happen? Like I feel like it's no way. It's probably 2 years away, at the earliest,
minimum.
right? At the
Yeah,
absolute
I think they
earliest.
have to do a bit bigger budget too.
Wow,
So they have
I'd
to like
100%.
and like an adventure that like is just more engaging and like mysterious
Does
rather
this
than
feel
just like.
grand to you, like in any way?
Well,
Like, do you ever?
it gets there, but it doesn't. It's not like tantalizing at all, really. Like there's not like a
It
lot
just
of breadcrumbs.
happens,
I
right?
felt.
Like he just like they arrive at that. I think about how they arrive at that island after surviving the plane crash, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a nice little character beat between him and Chloe, and they, there's like the 16th betrayal happens, and then he's on the boat from Uncharted 3, Uncharted 4, the same like speedboat essentially, and then he goes to an island again, just like Uncharted 4, and finds a sunken pirate ship, just like Uncharted 4, and it's like, man, like you guys are borrowing these elements from this much better story because if you haven't played Uncharted 4, please do yourself a favor. Even just go to YouTube and just like watch the game as a movie, like whatever the 3 hour
And
experience
that brings up
would
a
be.
part of the conversation where like
Like,
it'd
what's
be
the point?
interesting to get a side of people who haven't played the game, right? Because that's also an audience that
Yes.
they're going for.
Right.
So they're trying to attain both audiences, and I think we're just too close to it where it's a little hard for us to be open to certain interpretations or whatever, which is fair enough. But I just think we know the specialness of the source material, and it's not quite there, but it does feel like a celebration of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's exciting and a positive in and of itself.
I agree.
But you also
That.
think of like HBO and The Last of Us and what they're doing with the television series, with
Yeah.
obviously heavier subject matter, but like that project is going to be just beyond
Well, I
this
mean,
one,
we don't know
I think.
anything about that project really, except for who's in it, and like
Yeah, we know who's in
that
it,
one
and the
photo of that.
creatives
Yeah.
behind it, right? Which are key members
I
of the
guess
game,
that's a great
which is
point. Like,
cool.
how much was Uncharted? Like, how many of the creatives at Naughty Dog were involved with this movie? Like, it was in development for so long. You got to imagine that, like, whatever input they might have had early on is probably largely lost in translation over time, right? Like,
Yeah,
we've got 3 writers attached here.
maybe consulted here and there for certain things.
Well, yeah, obviously, I'd have to imagine that you can't just make
But I
this
don't
movie
think they
without
had
talking to them.
any influence other than that, other than those meetings, I guess.
Yeah, and like so ultimately, like I said, the movie comes off as kind of it has this kind of like desaturated nature.
Commercial version of it.
Right. It's kind of like it's like you can see the potential. There's like all these little elements that are working, and some things like really shine at some moments, like certain character beats, and some jokes land better than others. That's not as necessarily important, but other elements totally land. Like I love what they were doing with the crucifix and how it was like it was like a key but also a compass. I think that's like a fun Uncharted. That's like that's something new and right out of the games. Or sorry, like a idea that's new, but you can imagine it coming from out of the games. So
I liked when he handled all the postcards. Like they kind of did the close up of an Uncharted when like you can go
yes,
through a journal or notes,
yes,
and like they even have that like moment where like you figure out the clues that you're looking at, and like you just see it in front of you, and like they do like a pull focus or whatever.
yes.
Thought some of those things were pretty clever.
Well, and because that's the other thing. It's like you want it to feel like not just an adventure, but a mystery that's like unraveling in front of you in this fascinating way. And I think at some parts it does. Like when they're working with those crucifixes and they're finding their way through Barcelona, like underneath that church. At first, it's like that's cool, but then all of a sudden there's a nightclub, and it's like, what is going on here? Because it's really, if you think about that sequence, like if you just take a step back at it and you say, okay, they're going to go into a church. There's going to be a thing about nuns. Okay, there's some background character stuff there. Okay, cool. There's some fun banter between the 3 of them. They're solving mysteries. They're trying to uncover. They're like making mistakes. There's booby traps. It's like really cool. And if you actually think about the end of the sequence, they're the chamber's filling with water. There's a whole, unfortunately, a fight sequence in a Papa John's, but there's this. If you again take a step back, there's this block in the middle where they're just at a nightclub for no fucking reason, and it doesn't feel like it fits the tone of the movie or the games. And
They just
shocked.
need another setting to do something that's like doable for their budget, I
Yeah,
guess.
but
I
just
don't
do
know.
another like
And like
you didn't
and then
have to. You didn't add anything.
seeing them in the tuxes or whatever, right? Like that's like I guess an iconic look from the third game.
Right. Yes. Totally.
and
In
just
fact,
they needed to
also,
get a lot of looks, and especially when he gets the iconic look when he's on the ship and he's like shooting a
yep,
gun finally out of nowhere
yep,
for some reason.
yep.
It's like really weird, awkward, like hero pose, quick
He
shots
looks
out of
very
nowhere,
silly. He looks
and
very
it's like, okay,
silly.
let's just see him like slow mo throw his arm to the side to aim a gun and then just cut to something else completely. It's like it just was awkward, I think.
Well, there's one element that works for me is when they actually use the theme music at that moment in like a
Yeah, that's cool.
compelling, like exciting way. And I thought, again, talk about missed opportunities. It's like I understand this is an
Oh,
origin movie. You gotta blaze your own paths, all that stuff. But like the music in this movie sucks. It's so forgettable. It has no drive.
and
It
when
has
they
no
play the
mystery.
OG version, I think after the post credit sequence,
Yes.
it's crazy. It's like holy shit! Like there's that feeling, that sense of adventure,
Yes. Right.
the goofiness of Nate, but like and then like that over the top quality, which I think this movie kind of nails actually.
Mm-hmm.
That are it's like over the top of believable with what they've set up, except for the flying from the cargoes and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, you just miss what we know of it, and I think that's unfortunate. That could be nostalgia and all that stuff, but I
That's
think when we
definitely an
talked about
element.
the creatives and everyone behind that project and how still it's like a standard and people talk about those performances today like it's for a reason.
Yeah. There's the games only have resonance today because the performances. It's largely a game about performances. Like if you think about the gameplay, the minute to minute gameplay in Uncharted, it's some of it's really fun when you get to the like I think by Uncharted 3 they really nailed like the gunplay and the ability to swing around stuff and like use the environments to create interesting both stealth and action sequences. Like that works I think largely, but you're just going through the motions to get to the next story beat, right? And you're like, oh, there's like, if there's a dialogue sequence, you don't even want to move because you want to be able to hear how the dialogue sequence plays out if it's like one of the ones that happens kind of like in the game,
Hmm.
it the franchise doesn't exist without Nolan North. I think they gave him the right amount of credit for that because um, he's basically playing a version of himself as Nathan Drake, and you
What do you
can
mean, like in his guest appearance?
no, I'm talking about his performance in the game. Like he's
Oh,
not
okay.
really putting a voice on, right? It's just his voice, right? It's
Yeah, he's
he's
just a bit more whiny, kind of sarcastic,
right.
jokey
He's got a
version
little
of
he's got a
himself.
little bit of those kind of those quips. He's a little bit more quippy than his like obviously any random normal person would be,
Yeah.
but it's very much as influenced by him. It looks like him, like a younger version, a lot in a lot of ways like a younger version of Nolan North. So it's like the reason we're casting people to look like the characters in the game is because again we're all owing that back to him ultimately. So I appreciate that in a lot of ways. Okay, let's I think you're right, Jeremy. We spent a lot of time talking about what this movie could be or should be. I think, by the way, you mentioned another set piece when they're at the auction. That's also ripped straight out of another game in Uncharted
Mm.
3. Done better in that game, by the way, too. So another misbeat because again, having that kind of the history between Sully and Nate at that point adds so much more drama to this, where it's just like just another backstab, another twist, right? Just someone else was is turncoating on another like it's literally happens like 8 times
Yeah.
in this movie. It's crazy. But let's talk about the movie as a movie. Like let's try to detach ourselves from the game a little bit as best we can and say like, hey, like if we were coming to this for the first time, we didn't really know about the games so much as we just like maybe we heard about them or whatever, but we didn't have the same attachment. Does this movie work as a movie to you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I don't know if I can really separate myself in that way. Like I really don't know if I can shoot through that perspective
It's
and
hard.
come up with
Yeah.
something. Because I just, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you can go
Well,
for
I
it, I
guess Jeremy,
guess.
what's your overall reaction to the movie, just generally speaking? Fine,
Um, yeah,
serviceable.
yeah, fine. And with that part of me that I can't separate myself,
Mm-hmm.
I give it. the props that it's at least celebrating what Uncharted is. So I think if new audience members are seeing that, then they might get that that unique sense of what Uncharted represents.
Right. It's like,
Uh,
okay, it's like, hey, we're distilling all these ideas down. Sure, we're borrowing whole cloth from the games. It's like,
yes.
and if you're a fan of the games, you're probably like, fuck, man, that it's like, this is another one. Here's another one. Here's another one. Like we just did for the last half an hour, basically pointing that out. But if you didn't know those things, I could see where someone would be like, here, like, oh, that's super cool when he was like avoiding that Scottish guy and jumping through the chandelier. What a fun experience! What a fun set piece that is. Or when Chloe steals the crucifix and they go for a run, like a foot chase. Always a good foot chase is always a lot of fun, right? And look at some good quips in there, like how slow are you, like stuff like that. Like that's all good shit. If you're just a Joe Schmo, go to the movies to turn your brain off and have a good time. I think you would largely get the idea, right? But I think even anyone who's has any kind of discerning taste, I would say, would probably come out of this movie say it's good, but it could be better. And I think that's the kind of the big kind of missed opportunity. That being said, Jeremy, I think we talked about this before, and I think this kind of reminds me of our conversation around Uncharted 2, or Last of Us 2, which is that like I thought The Last of Us 2 didn't need to be a game, would have been better as a movie or television series. Where when I think we were talking about Uncharted for a long time, we're like, how cool would these be as movies? It'd be really cool as a movie, but it's like at the same time, it's like they essentially are movies. So it's like, and I think of obviously that PlayStation ad from around the same time of Uncharted 2, I believe, where it's like, dear PlayStation, my girlfriend doesn't. My girlfriend thinks that Uncharted is a movie, and I like there's this whole thing, which is like I think
in the marketing for like God of War too. I think.
Yeah, they did that. Like it was the Dear PlayStation stuff was like a really successful marketing campaign, I think, and introduced.
They had a few
what's
hits
his name?
for sure.
Yeah.
With their marketing schemes.
Who was the VP? That dude, that actor they had. Like,
oh yeah, I don't remember the name.
Like that was peak PlayStation stuff. Was good then. Yeah. But like I was saying, like we didn't necessarily need them to be movies because they were already in a lot of ways kind of doing what movies would do, but better.
Yeah, it was a whole different, immersion in video games to that point. Like essentially, like this is a AAA studio doing the impossible, or what's expected from an adventure game.
Yeah. It's kind of like where I'm like, it's kind of how I come to my final kind of verdict on this all kind of boils down to the fact that the games are so good, the stories are so much fun that I could go back and replay those games anytime. I probably replayed those games more than almost any game I've ever owned, and it'll always be like it's always there. So it's like this is something a little bit new. It kind of touches on some of those things. It's like I'm glad that they managed to nail the tone largely. Like I was like, thank God for that at least, right?
With that little bit of the over the top quality to it that gives it that sense that it could be a more epic or grand adventure.
It's a little bit larger than life. All the characters are a little bit larger than life, and it's like, okay, that's good movie. That's fun. That's why you go to the movies, right? But like we talked about, it's hard to separate our expectations. We always talk about how our expectations have I think people just generally, including ourselves, just do a terrible job of trying to separate themselves from their expectations. Have no expectations when you go into these types of movies. And I would say if you go into Uncharted, if you haven't seen the movie and you're still listening, go into that movie with no expectations. Just be open to what the movie's trying to do. And I think, coming back to my earlier question, Jeremy, I had with you, is like, does this movie work as a movie? I think largely, yeah. I think it largely does. It has, for me, one glaring error that I think that makes, from a pure storytelling, filmmaking standpoint, completely misses completely whiffs on it, I think. And that's when they take out Antonio Banderas in this this big twist, like right in the middle of the second act, where he's betrayed by this character named Braddock. And by the way, is Braddock a whole it's like a new character, right? That's not someone we know from the games.
I don't believe so, but I remember thinking like, it might as well be like it's a perfect villain type that you'd expect to have like this boss kind of
Right,
figure in an
reminds me of
Uncharted game.
Uncharted. Is it 4 that has the? Yeah, right. Has the female like basically muscle from the main bad guy. Then
right.
there's the spin-off in Lost Legacy. Let me look that up. What's her name? Who are the characters in this game?
But yeah, with the PG-13 rating and just the way that twist and that kill kind of happens, it's
right.
kind of confusing for one because it is a shocking decision, but it's more so confusing because of what they focus on,
how they shoot it
to show us like the wound itself, and it just seems
so weird.
A representation of what this whole movie is just weird and cheap, kind of.
It does have I agree with you. It has an air of cheapness to it. That's like, I think unnecessary because like I think they try to tell this big like this big story that has like really big scope, right? We're gonna fly around. We're gonna fly out of a plane. We're gonna have pirate ships attached to helicopters. It's gonna have everything you need, right? But I think, but because they're budget limited, some of that stuff comes off poorly. I think ultimately the CG's fine across the board, serviceable, but there's an air of cheapness to everything else. Like this idea like, oh, we'll have a fight in a Papa John's. It's like, no, don't do that. Like, why would you do that? So that comes back to the same thought I have about Antonio Banderas, because I'm right there with you, Jeremy. I think the character is Santiago Moncada. This idea of the Moncada family and their history connected with the larger plot, really cool, I think, right? This twist that his father is like, no, our legacy is filled with blood. We're gonna get rid of all of our money. You know what I mean? Like, is, I think, a really fascinating idea. Like, whoa, let's explore that. But instead they don't. They murder the father, which obviously sets up Antonio Banderas as a bad guy, right? And you're like, oh, okay. I saw it coming, but I'm it's a pulpy movie.
But you didn't see this coming. So that's
I didn't see this coming. You're right, Jeremy. In some senses, it works as a twist that's surprising. I will give them that. Okay, but I think it hurts the movie largely. There's so many twists. This is a twist that doesn't need to be in there, and because
like I said, he's the one portion of the movie that you could say is better, on par with being whatever his role is,
100%. Because there's not like the villains aren't that great in the games, right?
Second rate, yeah.
Yeah, and so like and the other thing that's more frustrating about the whole thing is that it takes Antonio Banderas out of the movie, and he's like a great actor. Like, why would we want less Antonio Banderas? I want more Antonio Banderas. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I thought that the amount was that he was in there in the first half was great. I'm like, oh, great, we're just gonna spend all this time with a villain. He's super cool.
Just huge close-ups of him just doing his thing.
Yeah, and he's so good at
his father in the past and the violence and the
blood. yes. It's really close to Antonio. It's like really good stuff for Antonio Banderas.
It just seems so typical for him, like, you know what I mean, like, but I guess it's not, or it is
absolutely.
To the point where he just makes it look so effortless and just
100%.
Therefore it's good and not lazy or anything,
It comes full circle. It's like, well, he's typecast, but he's so good at it, so it works. It's kind of exactly. That it's a weird way to put it, but I think you're absolutely right. And so instead, you remove. And the other thing I liked about Antonio Banderas as a character was that he had like clear and understandable motivations to be a villain. I think it's so easy to write.
And then when he popped off, it
villain.
was actually pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Right. Like when he started to raise his, like, that's when he killed his dad, right? Like, or.
Well, I think he killed his dad a little bit more slowly. It was like a quieter thing, right? Because she stabs him or whatever. But like
there's that sequence where he's just kind of like yelling about like what's owed to him and like where like affirming his decisions.
He sounds like a crazy person, but
But it's like, oh shit, this is pretty dope.
Yep. And again, so they just like, I don't know, maybe there's more to it, Jeremy. Maybe they're like, well, we couldn't actually get him for the back half of the movie. Like, we couldn't film with him. so we had to take him out.
Yeah.
And
we'll
we
just
had to
put
do
some
that.
lipstick on his neck and then do a bunch of close-ups.
Jeremy, no, like, so it's so funny because I think about like when we were making movies in high school, right?
Yeah.
And there's that classic shot that you did of the headshot to Tyler Jackson, R.I.P.
Right.
Actually, Tyler Jackson. Sorry, he's passed away. But yeah, it's essentially lipstick that you placed on like his forehead, and it looks about as good as the effect in this movie, where he cuts his throat and it kind of starts to bleed, and then it stops for some reason, because every time you've seen someone cut someone's throat in a movie, it always stops bleeding immediately. And then what's baffling to me is like it's an unforced error because you don't have to spend a lot of screen time looking at the wound, like just cut away from it, like use some movie magic to make it look more brutal than it actually is. If you have a PG-13 rating, you don't have to do that, but they chose to, which is why it's so weird to me. And that's kind of part of the cheap factor comes across there for sure. But again, coming back to his clear, understandable motivations, I still don't understand Braddock's motivation. And Braddock, by the way, a character that reminds me of Nadine Ross, who's the ex-mercenary from Uncharted 4. So that's where there's some similarities there. But like, Jeremy, can you like what's Braddock's motivation? He just wants to be rich, or what's the like?
Yeah,
that's it.
Just like Sully.
yeah. No, that's fair, right? I guess that's fair. And I guess, I mean, you talked about early, Jeremy, you talked about like, well, they just wanted to get these characters established so we could tell all their stories. That's fair. But do you feel like they did a good job establishing these characters? Like, how much, if you're coming into this movie, you don't know Sully, do you feel like you have a good sense of Sully? I think largely, yeah. Less so Nate for some reason. Like, we get some backstory. He has an attachment to his brother, but like, he's a bartender, I guess. But other than that, it's just him being really smart at stuff. That's the rest of the movie. I would have liked a little bit more character development from him. Same thing from Chloe. Same thing from Braddock. Like, maybe this movie needed an extra 20 minutes to like explore some of that stuff more. Like, I don't know.
That's it, 20. Good 20.
Well, not half an hour. I don't know. What's the runtime of this movie? It's
probably just like 2 hours on the nose.
1 hour, 56 minutes. So
Yeah, cool.
like an extra 20 minutes I don't think would have hurt this movie necessarily too much. Okay. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you're like, this we need to discuss this?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think we went over quite a bit.
Jeremy, did you ever see that Nathan Fillion short film?
Yes.
With Uncharted?
Yeah.
How much do you think about that?
More memorable than this entire 2-hour movie.
I think about that short film more often than I feel like I should.
Yeah.
You know?
But that's like a slice,
yes.
a look into Nathan Drake's as he's an established character.
Right.
This movie is trying to establish so much in so little time. It's a feet in that sense because it is quote unquote successful with what's happening.
So they made. I'll just tell you, their worldwide revenue is 143 million. Sorry.
Yeah. Someone high up already said it was a successful.
Yeah, they consider it a success.
New franchise.
I don't know if we say we know for sure if it made money necessarily, but I feel like, given everything that we know about how movies are right now, it's
yeah. No, you get the news relatively quickly on what's happening with your property. That's usually what happens.
Well, because you don't want people waiting around. Like it's like
right.
we
just saw it with Peacemaker, right?
Yes.
Season 2 is coming.
Well, the Halo series got renewed for season 2, even though that's not even out yet. It's a little bit different.
I didn't hear about that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Wonder Woman 1984. Immediately after.
This movie sucked, but don't worry, we have another one coming.
We've heard you. You want another one of these?
Yeah.
We know you really mean the first movie, but not the third act.
Right. They really are. They're gonna figure it out eventually. So this movie, by the way, was directed by Ruben Fleischer,
who did Deadpool.
He's got a lot of movies under his belt. He did Venom.
Oh, Venom, right.
He did Venom, and Zombieland. That's are kind of, I think, his two biggest movies. What stands out to me about this movie, which is Venom, Let There Be Carnage, was his last movie before Uncharted, and then Venom was, I think, whatever. There was a bunch of TV work between there. He did Superstore. He did Bog Beanie Bog, Stumptown, Zombieland,
The
Double
movie
Tap.
wasn't really that funny, to be perfectly honest. I think there was
Uncharted?
a lot of like there was a lot of just
Jokes that didn't land for you?
not much laughter happening. I mean, the theater wasn't packed, but like.
But it's not. I would argue, to me, Jeremy, that Uncharted is not a comedy in the full sense. It's funny, but it's not a comedy. This, I think, nails the same sense of humor that Indiana Jones does.
Translation here, I think they were going for a bit more comedy here and there. The chewing of the bubble gum, the constant nagging in between their relationship and on who's doing what. Like it's more prevalent throughout than you think. It's just we weren't really eating that up.
It wasn't landing.
It was just the 4 or 5 times. It was just the 4 or 5 times that Mark Wahlberg did his thing.
Well, yeah, and then we're like,
oh, okay, that makes sense. He's a version of a potential Victor Sullivan, but it has that Mark Wahlberg spin on it. It's kind of funny. It kind of works.
Yeah. So, like, here's the thing about Mark Wahlberg. Love him or hate him, he's gonna put in the same performance in every single movie.
It's the same exact performance.
It's literally like Jeremy. I was watching the movie and I was like, which am I watching Transformers? Am I watching? What's that bodybuilding one?
Am I watching Boogie Nights?
Boogie Nights. Like, I don't know which movie I'm watching with Mark Wahlberg.
Am I watching Pain and Gain?
Yeah, Pain and Gain. Thank you. Like, it's always the same. It's all, and then, like, I think that's a very fair criticism of him, which is that, like, he doesn't have range.
The same.
Well,
it's the haircut.
Well, it's more. No, it's more than the haircut. It's more than the haircut. And by the way,
jackets.
His haircut does match Nathan Drake's, like, haircut perfectly. I will give them that. Like, that was a fair enough assessment. Close. When they're like, but, like, the point I'm trying to make here is that, like, he doesn't have range. He doesn't know how to do a different performance, and it's like, it's so unfortunate because
he's so good at getting all heated and flaring his nostrils and throwing a funny quippy thing.
He always is very frustrated. He's
the funniest over the top one was, like, when he said something about how he couldn't, like, run or something because he's got a bum ankle or something.
Right.
But
he's just always frustrated. It's just, and it's like, again, it's fine. It totally works, I think. But just like we talked about when we talked about Red Notice, which a movie that obviously doesn't have Mark Wahlberg in it, but we came out of that movie, we were like, wow, what a they totally nailed the Uncharted tone. And I think, by the way, these Red Notice and this movie are very similar. Like, their shortcomings and their successes, like where they're good and where they're not, is, like, the same to me.
Just here's a bunch of star power, and Red Notice has a bit more.
Right, but still lacks charisma. Like, I you could almost argue, and I don't think you could in this modern age, just, like, cast an unknown, right? Like, bring in a like what they did for Solo, essentially, right? Like, you have to have an established character that people know if you're going to do that, I think. But, like, Tom Holland is fine as Nate. But there's a massive disconnect between what I think of the character and what the performance he's putting in here. It doesn't have that same charisma, that same, like, charm to it that I think Nathan Drake has in the games. And again, I know we're coming back to this over and over and over again, but the shortcomings of this movie as a movie are, like, direct parallels to what the game succeeded at. Right? You talk about, like, these like second-rate performances compared to what we got out of the games, and of course it's different. You're talking about live performances versus motion capture and all that kind of stuff. But I think you come out of this movie, and I think most people are probably bigger fans of Sully than they are of Nate. We spent a lot of time talking about the other characters. How much time we spent talking about Nathan Drake? Like, very little.
I think
And
he just comes off as just being like a really good person, and it's like
right,
that's all he's going for essentially. Like you just kind of root for him, and he's always doing the
loves his
right
brother,
thing.
right?
Yeah, and like it's
Yeah.
it's kind of clever how they set his whole like desire for adventure, tying it to his relationship with his
Mm-hmm.
brother,
Mm-hmm.
giving us a little bit of that backstory that was, it was quick, but it did the trick, I guess.
Yeah.
And just knowing that that's kind of his driving force, that's why he finds himself, you know, kind of searching and stumbling across this world of thieves essentially is cool. It's just he wouldn't be the typical Nate that we know because he doesn't have that much
He's not there
experience
yet.
behind him, and he
Yeah.
hasn't heard Sully uh, be Sully
'Cause
enough.
he hasn't learned the quips from Sully yet.
Yeah, because
Like that's his.
because essentially it's a father-son relationship
That's true.
when
That's true.
they're in the games.
That's
So
true.
a lot of the charisma and the jokey quippiness can come from Sully,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good
or
point,
would
Jeremy.
have.
Well, and it does in this movie, right? Largely. Um, and so so let's think about a little bit like what does an Uncharted 2 film look like, right? Like are we adapting a game story? Are we trying to adapt the Uncharted 1 movie now like as a game to movie? What's the kind of the I think you have to
What
introduce
would be your
Elena,
take? What would
right?
you what would you like you're saying what would you do? Like how would you
Well,
how would you be shot for shot? Because
I don't
this
think
movie
there's a
isn't
point to
that,
do that,
but
right?
it is that in a lot of sections
Well,
because it
it's
borrows.
it feels like shot for shot remakes of sequences interstitched with like uninspired dialogue. Like
Yeah.
it's like this would be better if it almost would be better if it was just a shot for shot remake of Uncharted, 1, but so I think the ship has sailed, if I can use a pirate ship methodology, on doing a direct adaptation of one of the game stories, right? Because
Yeah.
you have to change too many things to make it work now.
To me, if we're coming from a love for the games,
Mm-hmm.
to me the movie looks like the first game in the sense that with Elena and Nate and just how they
Right.
come together and they find themselves in the middle of nowhere, and their backs are against the wall,
Well, they hate each other
and
at first. They
yeah, you're
clearly
learning
don't
to, yeah,
see
but
eye to
but
eye.
but then you see that Nate has like a lot of skill in what's going on here. He's experienced, and then she's intrigued by that, and like they have to work together to just keep moving forward. But for a game it just works so well. Like,
Yeah.
but for to do that in a movie, I don't know if it's enough like
Well, I
to
think so.
sell.
It's funny you meant it's funny because I think you have to introduce Elena. Like I don't think you can get around that. She's a core part of the game. It's a major component to the character, their relationship. It's like the
It's the
relationship
yin
between
and yang.
yeah, the relationship between Nate and Elena is like you see it progressing through the games. It comes to a head in the fourth
You see
game.
what becomes clear and what becomes like more at stake
Right.
because it's like that desire for the adventure and that
Mm-hmm.
addiction almost that plays more so in the fourth game, right?
Well,
uh
that fourth game is so good, Jeremy, at exploring the characters, and I think you learn a lot about all of the characters in that game, like so much,
and then
But
seeing him go in the attic and like rummage through photos to like take us
exactly,
back, and like
yes,
they do that in this movie, and we know that as game players,
hmm
but they do it to relate Nate to his brother and like kind of dive into that part of his history.
I'll give them the props though that like introducing the brother concept now makes way more
Is
sense
key.
than
Yeah.
introducing the brother in the fourth installment.
Yeah.
Like he's never mentioned his brother Sam in three
Hmm.
adventures. Like what a like that's a crazy twist. But like okay, fine. So this makes it so much better because now Sam can be a bigger part of his life throughout the adventures and all that stuff. I think what's really cool about Nate as a character in the games is that I think from Elena's perspective, you mentioned how Tom Holland just plays him as like a really good guy. That is ultimately how he comes off in the games as well. He's a good guy. His heart's largely in the right place, but he's kind of caught up in the wrong crowd, right? Like, why are you a thief? Like
Hmm.
you're not a like you don't need to be a thief. You know, um, you could be a lot
But
more like
that's all
Indiana
he
Jones.
knows through the relationship with his brother, I guess, and just kind of
Exactly.
so that's
So
why it kind of works, and you root
yeah,
for Tom's version here. But we
yeah.
only get a sense of his ability through the bartending thing, which even he talks about in his interviews. He had to find a way, a different way to show that his Nathan Drake is capable, and it is kind of a fancy way to showcase that, right?
We talking
Like,
about when he's like just talking about the Negroni and like where it was
yes,
invented and stuff like
exactly,
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because that's really our into his Drake,
Well, and you know what? I talked
essentially.
about that that like Cub scene, and it's like it's dumb, it's there, but I will give them like credit on execution because the fight sequence behind the bar is actually very fun and
Mm.
like I think feels right at home, and the like the stakes are high enough, but also like it's kind of whimsical at the same time. Like they're doing tricks with the bar stuff, and like I think that totally works from a kind of like a execution standpoint. But like so, yeah, I think what I was saying, coming back to this idea of like what's the sequel look like. It's this idea of them clashing over his kind of outward facing identity as a kind of charismatic thief, willing to can deceive the best of them, can do the backstabs just like anybody else. He's learned that as he's gotten older, and then Elena kind of over time seeing through that, right? Seeing what type of person he can be. He is ultimately a good man, right? And then that relationship kind of budding in that first movie. And if that's the case, right? You it it almost becomes like a rom-com in some ways, right? Like this action rom-com.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I I'm not necessarily opposed to that. Like if it works, like if it's just like it's Tom Holland and unnamed great actress with great chemistry with him. I don't know, maybe Zendaya. Um, like I'm just kidding, but like I'm just saying you could if you find an actress who has great chemistry with Tom, I think that carries a movie. You could totally build a kind of a fun um, um, you know, action adventure mystery around that, and get then whatever. If you want to steal components from other games, okay, maybe they go to Ireland and they find some thing under the snow, and then they go back to the jungle, and so like that kind of stuff. Interchangeable at this point, I suppose. Like I said, the ship has sailed on that, so it has to concentrate on Elena, I think. And I don't know, there's an element of kind of maybe Sully getting jealous, like he's maybe losing a little bit of the hooks he had into Nate, that kind of stuff. I think plays well enough, right? It's easy to do. It totally works for Mark Wahlberg's character. It's easy, like Mark Wahlberg can just do it, you know. Um, but I don't like you talk about like, it's an early version, it's a young version of Nathan Drake, but like Tom Holland has a baby face. Like he looks like he could still play a high school kid. So when does like and they make a joke about puberty and all that kind of stuff. It's just around the corner for you. But I I kind of want to see a full grown like I know that he's like super ripped for this movie, right? And they have the shot with him like doing sit ups and stuff whatever. But I don't know, like I would like an older looking version of Nathan Drake, someone who now looks more capable, right? Can kind of his presence carries a little bit more weight. I like Tom Holland as an actor, but I don't necessarily know if he's going to be able to bring that type of take to the character for the next movie. And maybe that doesn't matter, but anyway, that's what I think. What do you think? Jeremy? What is Uncharted 2? Do you kind of fall in line with what I'm thinking, or is there kind of something else that you would want to incorporate?
Yeah, I think it would be that ideally, just to kind of bring in another key character from the series.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll be interesting to see what choices they make with the brother Sam,
Right, that's a good point
and
too.
how
You need
close they keep that to four, which again is way later on in their life. And do they make a twist with him? Does he, obviously you can use that character. Like at some point, I'd imagine they'd kill him off to really get some depth there. But
you fridge
that
him.
that seems like kind of, I don't know, just not unique at all. But like,
Yeah, it's a little too easy, right?
like, well, what else? What's the end game with once he finds his brother? What, like, is it happily ever after? Like,
No, I think what's great
no.
about Sam as a character is that he's always kind of a piece of shit, and he's kind of he's like his intentions are good, but his
Hmm.
greed kind of always gets the better of him. So I think you
And
can
but
have
and
the
that
cake and eat
was
it too.
and Nate needed that though, right, to kind of show that perspective
Right.
of what he's gonna choose his next, bit of his
Well, he's
life
gonna
to be
choose
like.
family over
Yeah,
over
because you
over
had the
adventure.
Victor
Right.
opposing with Elaine or whatever, and then
Elena, yeah.
Elena, and now yeah, Sam just is like another piece of that puzzle.
Right. So I think you can have your cake and eat it too. If you play, if what's the comes back to it all over again. You have to know and understand these characters because the stories write themselves. Once you place the characters, you know them well enough, and you place them in interesting scenarios. Everything plays will just work. Like you put Nate with a version of Elena that understands Elena as a character. She's not a female version of Nathan Drake. She's her own character, right? You place her into the dynamic with Nate and Sully, and then that creates its own type of dramatic tension that they eventually all become to grow into their own little family, and then you reintroduce Sam, and that kind of throws this kind of monkey wrench into the whole scenario. And what's Sam's whole deal? Nate's probably really excited to see him, but for Sam, it's like it's more conflicted. Like all these things are right in front of you, right? If you're writing these movies, in my opinion, right? And by the way, use the fucking theme music. Like you could just. I thought about all this all the time. It's like you could do a slow version, you could do a fun version. I think about the version from Uncharted 4 specifically, which is like the slowest. Like it goes, it's fine in Uncharted 1. It's the best version. It's like super bombastic in Uncharted 2. Uncharted 3 adds a little bit of like mystery to it. By the fourth version of the theme music, it's like kind of sad. But you can use those versions. You need to create themes for these characters. They touch on it here. They don't use it to its fullest potential. But so I think for me, Jeremy, like Uncharted 2 is an easy layup. Like I feel like you just throw them a little bit of cash,
Yeah.
introduce the characters, put them in the right places, and this will all just work. And people
Yeah,
will be excited to see it.
you don't have to necessarily do the all this explaining like at a rapid rate now. You can
Right.
really
You can
sink
slow
your
down.
teeth
Yeah.
into the established plot line regarding Sam and how that ties into his adventure, and then
Yeah.
meeting Elena.
Yeah. And then after that, you can kind of just do whatever you want. You want to do a third kind of like Uncharted 4 style finale where it looks like he's going to retire even though he still looks like he's 15. You could probably try that, right? But in my opinion, I think you could tell a whole bunch of like serial style stories. You have Tom Holland if he's willing to stay attached to the character. I guess that's a kind of a question mark, right? I'm sure he signed some sort of multi-year deal, but
I It's gonna be a while though too because he is. I
busy,
think he said he's filming like a TV show soon, and then he's taking a break because he's just
right?
been going crazy.
Nonstop. Yeah.
And then he wants to take a break before Spider-Man 4, which
Right.
will obviously be a gigantic movie and will take place, later. You know what I
So
mean? Like,
maybe they probably because Sony is obviously behind all of that and this, right? I think maybe you try to schedule him so that he's doing Spider-Man and Uncharted like back to back, so he doesn't have to get in shape again. Like he
right.
just kind of
He definitely got in real good shape for
he
this one.
is absolutely ripped. Like I can't. I just want. I know they've like quote unquote like published what these people do to like get in shape or whatever for these movies, but I just don't believe it. Like when they're just like, oh yeah, just eat broccolis and do 100 sit-ups a day and you'll look just like this. I'm like, no, it's not that simple. Like I just like I refuse to believe. Maybe it is, Jeremy. I don't know. Maybe tell me if I'm wrong. But like there is now they've Daniel used to make the joke that they've invented the super soldier machine from Captain America: First Avenger, and they're just using it on these actors now
Mhm.
because it doesn't make sense. And here's the other thing. Actually, I want to talk about with Uncharted 2. Like, potential what a sequel looks like. I think you do what you did again with Antonio Banderas, but you just stick with it this time. Just find an actor who's a little bit older, more established, can bring some gravitas, and you actually lean into that in a kind of a mustachy, twirly type way. I think that totally works for this type of movie too, by the way. So anyway, that's just my thought. One last thing I want to talk about, Jeremy, with you is the PlayStation like stinger at the beginning of the movie. You walked into the theater just in time to catch it. You can actually go see it on YouTube. I think there's the videos out there, but it's like blue. It's kind of this Marvel Studios style idea, right? It's all blue. And it shows their biggest characters. What did you make of that kind of stinger?
I guess too soon or something maybe is my thought on that.
Unearned,
Like,
right?
you're just like trying to showcase these titans, i- if you will, like in how you're presenting them, like these epic uh characters, which they are in their own right, but not really on the big screen. So I guess that unearned feeling comes into play there.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so we're expecting a solo movie of all these characters or something, you know? Because
Yeah.
wouldn't you do a movie on all those properties if you're gonna put it in your
Well, I think
movie
obviously, but like,
version logo?
what's a movie of Astrobot look like? I guess it's a kids animated movie or whatever.
Right.
Like, I think what's interesting, Jeremy, is you mentioned when we were having we were recording a mini podcast essentially in the movie theater, watching the credits
Oh yeah.
to the I'm sure the lovely enjoyment of the cleaning people who were in the theater trying to just do their
Waiting.
job. We're talking. You're like, it's just weird because it's like all these like brand new characters. PlayStation has been around for so long, right? Was it like 25 years of PlayStation, so around that, and so much history, like so many different characters, and Crash Bandicoot comes to mind, like stuff like that, right? Sly Cooper. You think of Jack and Daxter, there's these long history of characters that have been associated with PlayStation, Sony, longer than any of these. But instead, what do we get for the characters in the Stinger? It's the new God of War, not the original God of War, right? The Kratos with the beard, right? We get Ghost of Tsushima. We get Aloy from the Horizon Zero
Horizon.
Dawn, right? We get who else, Jeremy? Am I missing anyone?
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, but like, well, and then I think Nathan Drake is in there. Looking,
Maybe
by the way,
Ratchet
like
and
he does.
Clank, because I think they have a movie already. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, yeah. But like, I I don't think there's any Last of Us references in there. I don't feel like I saw any. So it's like that's a little, to me, that's a little odd. It's like, why, these are maybe the most recognizable characters now, but like, if you're gonna do this, like, you almost want it to be more of like a celebration of the brand's history, kind of give it some gravitas, right? This just looks like generic, like any movie studio generic stinger stuff. It's less compelling than that arrow going through the axes or whatever. Or the what's it the what's J.J. Abrams tiny robot, mad angry robot, mad robot? What do I think? Bad robot. Just like a robot running through the fields. Like, it's just like, it just is just as forgettable as that. Where I think the Marvel stuff has always been super cool. There's a theme music that's associated with it that's exciting. There's like, you can see little clips from the movies, and before that's from the comic books, and I don't know. The DC ones were fun. Like, I think, Jeremy, I think back to when they did the old DC logo. That was, I feel like, not around for long enough, in my opinion. The D with the folding page.
Right.
And like all the kind of the different ways you could play that logo, right? You could make it yellow and black if you wanted Batman, or green if you were on for Green Lantern, that kind of stuff.
They don't want
Which
anything to do with Green Lantern though, so.
Jeremy, Green Lantern is like on like life support at DC right now. Like,
Well,
it's,
They definitely like started filming a show.
you think?
Like yeah,
Wouldn't
because
there
they
be
had a bunch of
casting?
casting.
Who? Well,
There
who?
was. They had Alan Scott casted and Guy Gardner casted, I believe.
Oh,
Like a
really?
pretty well known Guy Gardner casting.
Green Lantern casting.
And then it was like, $100 million
Finn
budget.
Whitrock.
Like there was like all these cool things. It's going to be different, time periods and
Right.
focusing on multiple lanterns. And they just kind of stopped the casting and news, and then we just stopped hearing stuff.
Not to make this a Green Lantern podcast, but like, yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
things aren't looking great if you're a Green Lantern fan these days. I mean, like that show, if it is in development, is certainly tight-lipped. Like there's, we're not hearing a lot about it. Nor would we with the Batman about to premiere, right? Any day now. So I don't know. Anyway, just another one of those examples of like, Sony's trying to. This is they're new at this. I think all things considered, if you look back, it's like, what are the video game adaptations that have worked on the big screen or on film or even just television, right? I think this is a fine example of something that's pretty good. It's not bad. It's not great. It's pretty good. It's certainly leaps and bounds better than I presume the Assassin's Creed movie was, which I never even saw, but I heard was brutal. Or Prince of Persia, or it just comes straight. I think it's just a little bit more understood how to do this. I will say, if you're looking for a really good video game adaptation, go watch Arcane on Netflix. It is so cool. It's a little YA, sure, but like it just looks so good. The music's so good. I highly recommend that in terms of, again, video game adaptations. So like, I don't know. I think it ranks pretty highly. Would you say, like, in terms of which is a pretty low bar, where this ranks to you in terms of like video game adaptations, Jeremy?
Uncharted?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'd have to kind of like it's fine. That's what we said, and it's
Right.
got some positive. It's not as good as the game. But that's kind of like what we should have expected, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Apparently, according to this IMDb trivia page, it says that Mark Wahlberg stated in an interview with IGN that he's only signed for one movie. So
bouncing.
Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Although it's funny, Jeremy, because like this movie, he brings out the mustache at the end of the movie, right? Some fun jokes. There's the Magnum is there. You kind of like, okay, that all is fine. But I don't know if you noticed, like, there's another Mark Wahlberg movie that's just coming out where he also has a mustache. So it's like one of those things like, did you just grow that? And he's like, I'm going to keep it for a while. Is it like a reverse like Superman scenario? I guess we may never know. But anyway, I think we've covered everything there is to cover on this. It was pretty thorough, in-depth discussion about Uncharted. Is there any final thoughts, Jeremy?
No.
Well, I'll help out. I'll say some final thoughts. I'll say that
if we haven't already.
I'll just say, again, it's just to recap, to close this all out. It's a dubious first step into this whole deal. You got to give Sony a little bit of a pass in terms of this is kind of new for them, to kind of to make these live action adaptations of their video game franchises. So you'll have to assume they're going to improve. They're going to be able to refine it. Like I said, the second movie should be a layup. So, but for all we know, it'll get lost in movie hell for another 15 years before we get another one, and then by then Tom Holland will have aged out of the role. So by then, who knows? But I'll just say that all in all, it wasn't terrible. I went in with just the lowest expectations, Jeremy. I just thought it was going to be the worst, and it wasn't. It wasn't the worst. And if that's, it's maybe not be glowing praise, but I would say, hey, if you're looking for a fun action adventure popcorn movie, this will totally satisfy you. It comes of that, like I said, that it has that heritage of the Indiana Jones type film. If you like that kind of stuff, you're gonna like this movie, I think, enough. The performances are good enough. The writing is good enough to make it largely work. If you're a fan of the games, you'll probably be largely disappointed by what this could have been. but I think it's hard to. I think it's hard to satisfy both those kind of agendas at the same time. So I'm not sure what you do. Kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. So anyway, I appreciate you for listening to this review. It was a lot of fun. I know I did promise that we would have a guest for this, and they pulled out last minute. It's very unfortunate, but they promised that we're gonna try to figure something out for another episode. So we're gonna try to get more guests on. We're working on it. It's hard. We're not that big of a show, guys, but we're working on it. So I appreciate if understand the. I appreciate your understanding in the fact that we didn't have a guest today, is what I'm trying to say. So again, if you want to help support the show, you could head over to patreon.com/TowerBabblecast, facebook.com/TowerBabblecast, or Twitter @TowerBabblecast on Twitter, which is where I enjoy the most. It's my favorite social media, so you get a lot of stuff there. And other than that, we'll be back soon with another full news episode. There's lots to discuss, but we'll also be doing Gone Girl, like I said, for the Film Club, the exclusive Patreon podcast, sometime within the next week. And until then, we'll talk to you then, and we'll see you soon. Okay.